One of the main ways that we can fight climate change is through carbon sequestration, which is when you take carbon from the air and you put it in the ground or inside trees or into long-lasting products that keep the carbon from re-entering the atmosphere. 1 hectare of industrial hemp can absorb 22 tons of CO2 per harvest. That's 1 to 3 times per year, depending on the climate that you have and the agricultural tech that you have available to you. Most trees do not even come close, absorbing a global average of about 7 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. Coastal rainforests are the best absorbers, and they're able to absorb a maximum of 22 tons of CO2 per hectare per year, which is conveniently the same as a single 4-month-long hemp growing season. So, instead of farms that are farming hemp paying a carbon tax for all of the machinery that they use and all of the methane that's released by their cows and all of those types of things, instead of paying a small pollution tax on those so that we aren't paying 100% of that cost, if they just grow hemp on one of their fields, they can literally sequester so much carbon that they can completely offset their output of carbon over the course of that year. And so this is why I think carbon negative farming is definitely one of the main ways that we can fight climate change, and we already know it works. Hemp can grow in all soil types except sand desert. It acts as a natural pest deterrent and weed killer, and it requires 50% less water than other natural cloth fibers like cotton, which is the most popular one in the world. It also produces more yield per acre than cotton, so it is potentially able to produce the same amount of material much more cheaply. Some could point to the large cross-ownership of agriculture and pesticide companies as one of the main reasons why hemp is still used too little. Often, they are in business arrangements in order to guarantee buyers for the rich people own chunks of both of these types of companies. So they're going to make each other play ball. Hemp not only fights climate change by literally taking carbon out of the air and shoving it into its body and then shoving it into the ground, but it also can replace a lot of products that we use that in and of themselves create a lot of pollution. So it creates pollution in order for us to create plastics, textiles, concrete, cosmetics, paper, rope, oils. There's clothing. There's a number of other things that hemp is able to replace because it is made out of basically 2 materials. Its leaves can be turned into oils, rope, clothing, paper, things like that. And the shiv, the wooden part of it, can be made into textiles, plastics, and a whole bunch of other things, and hempcrete. By producing an insane amount of hemp, we will be able to more cheaply produce a number of other products, and thus, theoretically, maintain international competitiveness. There's a lot of countries, actually, this was my next point. Countries have begun to cultivate the crop to reduce their need to import processed materials like plastics and textiles or pollute their own air by producing them in the country. So essentially what that means is, like, for example, there are countries in Europe where right now, up until now, they've had to import oil to make plastics, so they maybe make the plastic inside their country, in which case a whole bunch of pollution goes into the air, or they can farm a bunch of hemp, make plastic out of that, and then they didn't need to import anything from out of country. They've just cleaned up their own air, and it takes 1 hectare to produce an insane amount of hemp. And so ultimately, it's extremely efficient land use as well. This is why we're seeing a lot of small countries use this as a way to reduce their imports. For example, 1 harvest acre of hemp produces as much paper as 4 acres of trees will over the decade or more that the tree matures. 1 4-month period produces as much as 4 times a decade. It makes no sense for us to be focusing only on forestry as a solution to climate change. However, that does not mean that we should completely forget the value and advantages of planting forests, some of which will become very apparent soon. So let's just take a look at one type of material that can be replaced by hemp and reduce the carbon footprint of building new buildings, for example. So Hempcrete, as it's called, is a negative emission building material that can replace non-high compression concrete and bricks. So it's not meant for supporting bridges or super tall buildings, but it's great for residentials. Concrete production and brick firing release pollution due to the chemical processes involved and the need to superheat some of the ingredients. Now, some of those ingredients are also in hempcrete. For example, lime has to be superheated. So it is possible that not as much of the emissions savings will be happening there. Most of the emissions savings are happening in the hempcrete itself. Hempcrete is not only made out of 45 to 48% absorbed carbon, but continues to absorb carbon even after it is used as bricks. After several years, a chemical process in the bricks caused them to petrify into stone, making them stronger over time. It is also fire and pest resistant and regulates temperature and the humidity of buildings. And we've got a video of just how fire resistant it is. It's incredible.
It does not burn. No smoke, no flame spread. And if you feel the back of the material, as you can tell, I'm holding my hand on it, so there's no thermal transfer. Well, we manufacture sustainable building materials.
So if hemp really is this wonder plant that can replace all things more cheaply and easily than anything else, why hasn't it already taken off? Well, largely, it's because of legal and political barriers that have been put up by the existing industries, which are controlled by capitalists. Capitalists do not actually like competition because it cuts into their profit margin. Let's explain why. Entrenched capitalist industries have fought laws that would make hemp a viable competitor. Big Forest, for example, has much to lose as they already have billions invested in trees that may never need to be cut down and sold for paper, cardboard, plywood, and many other materials that hemp could easily and cheaply replace. There it is. If hemp reduces demand for lumber, the price of wood decreases permanently and devalues their long-term investments. Banks, funds, and rich investors that hold sway over all industries do not want to lose their sunk costs, meaning investments that are already spent. They cannot get that money back, so they would rather make sure that it gets sold for a higher price when the time comes. They do not support competition from a new hemp crop that, while superior, loses them a little money in the long run. As such, there are few businesses operating that have invested in their hemp processing capacity. So there is more hemp being produced than can be turned into materials and goods at the moment.